Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, Zoraida. Welcome to the Barnes & Noble Live virtual discussion of their July speculative fiction monthly pick, The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by acclaimed author Zoraida Córdova. I'm going to start with a little housekeeping as everyone sort of joins us. If you have purchased a book along with your event admission and have not already received it, your signed book will be mailed after the event, and you can expect it to arrive in 8 to 10 business days. Also, we're going to chat for about 30 minutes and then leave time for some Q&A. So I personally won't be following the chat. I'm terrible at like multitasking chat and talking. So please use the Q&A module down at the bottom to ask your questions. And attendees, you have the capability to upvote your faves. The burning questions that you just need Zoraida or I to answer. So please take advantage of that, and I will try to get to those first. And I think that's it for housekeeping. The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina has been described as a mashup of Mexican Gothic and The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, with a touch of The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin, where a family searches for the truth hidden in the past in this, and I quote, expertly woven tale of family power threaded with as much mystery as magic. I am Rebecca Roanhorse, your moderator and conversation partner this evening. I am a New York Times bestselling author of 6 novels, among them the pre-Columbian inspired epic fantasy Black Sun, which I get to show off here, its sequel Fevered Star, and Star Wars Resistance Reborn. It is my honor to introduce our special guest tonight, Zoraida Córdova. Zoraida Córdova. What's that?
I said hello.
Oh, hello. I'm on a roll, Zoraida. Zoraida is the acclaimed author of more than 24 novels and short stories, including the Brooklyn Brewhouse series, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, A Crash of Fate, and the book we're here to discuss tonight, The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina. In addition to writing novels, she serves on the board of We Need Diverse Books and is the co-editor of the best-selling anthology Vampires Never Get Old, as well as the co-host of the writing podcast Deadline City. And she writes romance novels as Zoe Castile. Zoraida was born in Guayaquil, Ecuador, and calls New York City home. When she's not working, she's roaming the world in search of magical stories. And we certainly have a magical story to talk to you about today, Zoraida. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this novel?
The Inheritance of, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, first of all. The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina is a book about a family, most importantly. It's about a woman who makes a terrible sacrifice and a terrible bargain, and then hides from the world. She has a lot of secrets, and the story picks up when, if you haven't read it, if you're in the chat and you're watching, some of the people haven't read it yet. So I'll try to keep it spoiler free. We follow Orquídea's descendants as they try to figure out why they have inherited their grandmother's magic, where this magic come from. And the story takes us back to Ecuador, which is where I'm from, where I was born. I immigrated to the United States when I was 6 or 7. I always forget. But I see we have some Ecuadorians in the chat. Hello, welcome. And so it really it's a story about finding home, finding identity, who you are, and the magic that lives in all of us. And, you know, I've known you for quite a bit now. So all of my books are magic and family, I guess. Those are my themes.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to tell a little story about actually the first time I met Zoraida. It was at the Sirens Con, which is a big science fiction and fantasy con, a feminist, women-centered con held in the Denver area. And I was a brand new writer. I think it was 2017. I didn't even have a book out yet. So I was just bringing along my like bound galleys. And maybe they were just like advanced reader copies. No, they're the galleys. That's right. Hoping to like pass them out and meet people and sort of like introduce myself, and try to, I don't know, survive at this con, my first con. And that evening, the first night we got there, I went to the bar. And Zoraida was there sitting with Victoria Schwab, if I believe correctly. And they invited me to join them. And I will never forget that. It was the nicest thing. I was just some random like con person as far as they knew. But I think Victoria had a new bourbon she was trying out, and Zoraida was like, ooh, you should come join us, try this too. And it meant the world to me, and it still does. And you're one of my favorite people, not just because of your writing, but because you're an incredible, generous cohort in this sort of crazy publishing world. And I just love to tell that story because I want people to know what a nice person you are, and how much I really care for you, and I'm happy to be here tonight talking to you.
Thank you so much. I love you so much.
Hey. So you are a very prolific writer, and your work spans genres and age groups. You've written for adults now, young adults, middle grade, and I've read most of your books. But this book, I have to admit, feels special. It feels like you seriously leveled up. This is, I don't know, really the stuff I think like award-winning prose, what you're writing here. Talk about the process of writing this book compared to the other books you've written. Did it feel the same? Did you know you were creating something special? Is this the book of your heart? Tell us a little bit about it.
I think that this book definitely felt different. I keep touching it because I just recently got the paperbacks. And they're very shiny. This book does feel different. And I want everyone watching to know that for writers, every book feels new, right? Every time, I feel like every time we sit down to the page, you never write a book the same way twice. And I'm 10 years into my career. My debut book came out in 2012. So I feel like a dinosaur in an industry that I feel recycles authors. So I feel very lucky that this book was the Barnes & Noble sci-fi pick, because it was my first time with something so amazing, with a bookstore that was like my bookstore growing up, right? We had one Barnes & Noble in Queens, New York. It's gone now. I'm very sad, but it was my refuge growing up, but that's beside the point. So this book felt different because I felt the weight and the pressure of having to write about my country. It's the book that is the most personal to me. I've taken family stories and mythologized them. I don't know if that's a word. It is now. I've taken the place where I was born, and I wrote about it in a different way. And I've had Ecuadorian characters or Latin characters in my work because I write the world as I see it, right? Like this is the world. New York is a very diverse place. That's just how it is. And I write what I see. But I did feel that pressure of like, okay, well, what if this is the first and only time somebody reads about Ecuador? I have to now represent Ecuador for everyone. And that's a lot of pressure. And I know that I put that pressure on myself, but it did help me just think about, this is the best sentence I have to write. This is the best paragraph I have to write. This is the best plot twist I can put right here. And so it really forced me and pushed me to hone and sharpen my skills. I've read this book a million times. My editor, the first draft that she got, I'm sure she like cried because she was like, what is this? This is not great. But, revision after revision after revision, it was like chipping away at something. And it felt different from the moment I started working on it.
Yeah, and I think, for most writers, the magic comes in the edits. Our first draft is always a bit of a mess. You're getting the story out on paper for the first time, but then you get to shape it, you get to hone it, you get to find the best words, find the, sort of sculpt the best sentence. And then if you're lucky, something magical happens. And certainly something magical happened here. We talked about, New York and Ecuador, and the story literally spans the continent. And Four Rivers is a fictional place, I assume, that is a little mysterious. I couldn't quite tell where that's supposed to be, somewhere in America. So not only does the story of Orquídeas cover the continent, it covers multiple voices and points of view, multiple timelines, because the story is actually told in more than one timeline. It really is an epic family saga. You mentioned before that you're always writing about families and magic, but this is really a huge undertaking. It feels, I use the word saga and epic. It feels epic. What made you want to take something this big on?
I didn't think of it as big when I first started. I thought it was a small family story. And then I will tell you that when I started writing this book, there was no past flashbacks in that first draft. So the book alternates from the present and the past. And I actually had to go in and because as I was reading the revisions, we're like, well, we're missing something. And the thing that was missing was the flashbacks to the 1950s when Orquídea was born in 1940. And so that once that happened, the story felt bigger because it's not just a microcosm look at this family. It's like, let's follow this woman as she goes across the oceans and joins a magical circus and talks to magical beings. And so that's when the story started taking sort of a life of its own.
Awesome. I don't know if you can just hear someone ring my doorbell. My dog is going nuts, but we're going to try to ignore that.
No worries.
So you just talked a little bit about the multiple timelines and the flashbacks. And maybe you sort of answered this question already, but for those who haven't read the story, and of course I will try not to spoil, we do have two very sort of separate timelines. One follows Orquídea through her life, from her birth through her life, I'll say, and the other follows a number of her grandchildren. And you said you started with the grandchildren's story, is that right? So why, I guess, what sort of was the thinking between the two timelines? How did you balance the two? Because they seem, sort of very well balanced. Just when I was sort of like, oh, I want to hear more about, Orquídea's growing up, then boom, we were back in her life, and it was so visceral and so real. It didn't feel like flashback. It felt like I was there, sort of with her. So how did you balance, the two timelines?
The two timelines were a little difficult. They were difficult at first. And I feel like most writers, when you go into something where there's like a time slip, it's hard because you want to have enough information. There's a Kurt Vonnegut quote where one of his rules of writing was like, you never want your audience to feel lost. So I was just like, here's all this information. But also I wanted to control what people saw. So I wanted to show that as these kids are discovering things about their grandmother, we are, as the reader, are actively reading about them. And so we're almost like anticipating the moment that the main characters are going to discover some of their grandmother's secret past.
Yeah, because there's definitely a mystery. Like, this is a family saga, absolutely, but there is a mystery at the heart of this story. And by the time I was about halfway through, I was just like flipping pages, like, I gotta know, like, what is she hiding? What is the secret? And it is awesome. Your payoff is great. Your timing of sort of laying all these facts for us to follow as the reader throughout the story line up like wonderfully. So kudos. I totally bought into it. It was awesome.
It means so much to me because I love your writing. So I'm just like, okay, great. Finally, I have my Rebecca praise. So,
so without spoilers, I think it's fair to say that Orquídea is not an easy woman for her grandchildren to love. And, she certainly, I think, earned her tough exterior, her shell that they can't break through. And in fact, in the book, you talk a lot about what it takes to love someone and how some people can't do it. And just, I guess, sort of that love is not easy, true, like sort of family love. And I was wondering what sort of inspired you to write a character as challenging as Orquídea? Because as well as I do, that often readers do not respond to women who are not, the likable woman or, easy, to get along with or something, sexism. But, is she at all like women that women in your family? What inspired you to sort of write a character like her? And certainly the men in this story. Orquídea has 5 husbands, an absent father, a cruel stepfather, helped to shape her into the woman she becomes. So talk a little bit about all of that.
Yeah, so Orquídea is a girl. She was born, she was raised by a single mother. They didn't have much growing up, and she sort of had to fend for herself in a neighborhood where she was called things like a bastard, or people looked down on her as this like runt of a child that maybe she shouldn't have been born and ruined this woman's life, right? And I think that like during that time period in the 1940s, in a place that would have been as conservative and Catholic as Latin America, she would have had a hard shell. She would have been growing up protecting herself. And I think that I pulled a lot of from the women in my family. That's not to say that the women in my family are mean,
No.
but I remember my great grandmother being really quiet and reserved. And the things that I discovered about what my grandmother went through as a young girl. My grandmother was one of 16 children. My mom only had 2 and I have 0. So learning a lesson down that breaking the cycle of but because I feel like the hardships that some of the past generations had to go through, like seeing literal world wars, and there were time periods in Ecuador where there was drought, and so there were no resources. The country just kept changing and changing. And so I feel like any of that would be enough to make somebody feel like they have to fend for themselves. And then Orquídea starts meeting people who take advantage of her and her goodness and her desire to have a home. And I feel like being so vulnerable and going into something where she gets into a relationship with a very handsome man who has a lot of power, and she's in this cycle of emotional abuse and infidelity, and so she does literally anything she can to find her way out of it. And that's where we bring in the magical aspect, right, of how she does that. So there is like a lot of hard truths, and then the whimsy of a magical circus.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the magic, because it is very magic, quite literally. There are elements of wonder, elements of the fantastical woven into the everyday. People sprout roses from their foreheads. Other people turn into trees. There are monsters, talking monsters in the river. So talk a bit about the role of the fantastical and nature in your book, because I feel like so much of it comes from the natural world, but it's just sort of like that step to the side where it becomes fantastical. And I know that a lot of Latin American authors get labeled as magical realism. Is that something you relate to? Is it something you reject? Something you feel ambivalent about? Talk a bit about all that.
Okay, so for everyone watching, magical realism is like this weird term that not a lot of people, I feel like throughout the years, like the definition has become blurred, but it started off as an art form. And then it became a label given to Latin American writers. And so I feel like when Latin American writers were creating stories, and they're writing stories where something happens, like somebody disappears from their town, right? And the day before they were talking about ghosts or something, right? And you're in rural Colombia, rural Ecuador, rural Argentina, and somebody just vanishes. Did they vanish because a guerrilla militia killed this person in the middle of the woods or the river, or did they vanish because the angels came and took them, or a ghost took them, or they went into another dimension, right? And I think that the belief of the supernatural and the brutal reality of very rural areas in Latin America sort of like combined. And they lived against side by side. And so that's magical realism. It's the mundane and the magical together. And I rejected magical realism as a title for my work because I consider myself a fantasy writer. And so then finally, when I did in fact write a book that I was like, okay, this is a magical realism book. Now I accept it because I did it on purpose, right? And so at the end of the day, people can call my book whatever they want because it now belongs to the audience and the public. But it is a very bizarre, it is a weird liminal space to live in.
Yeah. Well, and a beautiful space, I have to say.
Yeah,
it's just really amazing. So yeah, whatever labels they want to go. Let me encourage people to put questions in the Q&A. I will be looking at that. I'm not following the chat. I am going to be checking the Q&A. So if you have questions for Zoraida or myself, you can put them in there. And you could upvote the ones that are the most pressing to you. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about home. So home is a big theme in this book. What makes a home, where home is, especially for Orquídea. I keep pronouncing her name. I know the accent is right there on the I, and I keep saying Orquídea, so I'm really going to try.
It's fine.
It's just because I read the whole book with that name like that in my head, so now I have to correct it. Because she comes from Ecuador, she comes to Four Rivers, leaves Ecuador, comes to Four Rivers after she's joined the circus, which is very, very cool, by the way. Traveled all over the world. And when one of her granddaughters asks her, where is home? Where is it? She says, home is wherever my bones lie. And so I know you're a world traveler. I know, I just from your Instagram, I see you've been all over. You went hiking in like the Scottish Highlands on your own, like a solo hike. I know you were in Spain recently. I know you've been all over the United States. What is home to you? How do you define home?
I think that's why I wrote this book, and that's why home is such a theme, a pervasive theme in my work. It's because I think I'm still trying to figure that out. I feel like New York is home, and Ecuador is home. Parts of Ecuador are home, right? And so I'm currently working on a Star Wars novel, and I have that question as well. Like, what does home mean to these people who travel around in space? And so I just can't escape the theme, right? When I was writing about, so Four Rivers is a town that Orquídea goes to, sort of like find refuge, and it becomes her paradise, her Eden, her safe space, her valley that she brings back to life from like dead rock. And a lot of that was inspired by this idea of like, what is the basic thing that humans want, right? People want home. They want home. They want safety. And the feeling of safety is different for everybody, and home is different for everybody. But what happens when the place that you were born in can no longer be your home, right? Like, and for Orquídea, she's not loved in her family, so she has to go somewhere and find, and so she's on this search for a place that she feels safe and that she feels wanted. And I think that everyone, no matter where you're from, can probably identify with that.
And I love that she creates her own family. Like, you talk a lot about, I think sort of your found family, and not so much in the sense of like friends and, sort of people that, bring in, but that Orquídea sort of has this sort of brood, by the end of her life, of children and grandchildren and even great grandchildren. And it's so sort of amazing that this one basically runaway girl, basically orphaned because her mother was, problematic, we'll say, comes at the end to really represent family. I thought it was really beautiful, so I just had to point that out. So that's
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I have to say, as we mentioned before, there's a dark mystery at the heart of this book. This is not just a family saga. This is a page-turning mystery. There's something terrible that Orquídea has done that exacts a terrible price upon her and her progeny. So without spoilers, can you talk a bit about that choice, giving her this sort of thing, sort of a dark thing that she's done, and why, again, you would make, sort of what am I trying to get at? I think it was very sort of true to this idea of this woman who's lived a hard life, and life gives and life takes, and life took and took, from her. So when it was her opportunity to take from someone else, she did. And it sort of dooms her in a way. So talk a little bit about that.
I
If I
think
didn't
that
just all say everything.
no, I think you're right. There's this idea of what would you do in order to have the thing that you wanted, right? It's sort of that wish fulfillment. Be careful what you wish for. Growing up, I love Disney movies, so Aladdin, like, be careful what you wish for. Like, if you had this one thing, right, what are the repercussions? I'm also really fascinated with the idea of there has to be a price for magic, because we live in inflation times, and even when we don't live in inflation times, everything costs something. And so for this awe-inspiring magical power, what is the cost of that? What would you do in order to be able to get it? And could you hurt somebody in order to get this thing that you want? And so it speaks to the survival of this woman. And I just want to examine what that would look like. And I think that as a writer, examining difficult characters, I know like not everybody likes reading about imperfect characters, but I really wanted to explore a character that made bad choices, because nobody's perfect. And so can somebody be forgiven? I know some people will never forgive a bad family member, and that's, that you have to put your own boundaries. But the characters in this book actually really want to heal. And so what does healing look like? So I think I answered the question, but yeah, without spoilers. Yeah.
Yeah, love it. You do say, and throughout the book, people keep telling Orquídea that she was born unlucky. Do you think that that's true? And then what do you think is the role of fate in people's lives? Like, both your characters, yes, but then, like, do you believe in fate in general? I'm just curious.
Sometimes I do believe in fate. Sometimes I do believe I have like a guardian angel or something like that, because I was like a wild 20-something-year-old at some point in New York City. Like, I made a lot of mistakes. And I feel like I've had some close calls of, like, one time I had an accident and I like lived unscathed. And so I do believe in fate to a certain extent. But for Orquídea, I think that she was told she was unlucky, and it probably had to do with like the colorism in her family, so it's an excuse for her family, but to say that, but really is like they just didn't do enough to love her. And so for them, it was like using this excuse of like, oh, you're unlucky, when actually it's like, we don't want to do what we need to do in order to love you. So that's hard. That's a hard thing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that idea. Okay, so let's, on that up note, we will talk about shift to some questions and answers. Okay,
sure.
So we're going to start with Brielle Estrada, who asks, you mentioned that you drew inspiration from your family. As a fellow Latina, I have to know how they took this book. P.S. I love it so much.
Thank you, Brielle. I think that only my uncle, one of my uncle's my best friend, one of my mom's brothers. He's like my surrogate dad. He's the only one in my family who's read it, and so he actually live texted me as he was reading it.
Oh
He
my
doesn't
gosh.
really he doesn't really read novels either, and so like when there was like a sexy scene, he'd be like, "I can't believe you wrote this for people to read." So that's great. You know, I did put in some family legends into this book,
Hmm.
and my uncle recognized them. He's like, I remember the story a little different, but basically it's this. Um, for
Oh.
instance, Orquídea makes a pact with the river that she grew up next to, which is the river I grew up next to. Even though it's a city, like Guayaquil is a metropolitan city, but there are smaller neighborhoods. And so I grew up in the neighborhood that Orquídea in the book grows up in. That was my neighborhood that I was born in. And it's literally just like a very long road that leads to the river. And Orquídea made a pact with the monster, the spirit that lives in the river. And that spirit has been in this river before modern times, before the Spanish arrived, before the Incas arrived. You know, there were indigenous tribes in Ecuador before the Incas too, which I feel like a lot of people forget, that the Incas were only in Ecuador for like 50 years. And so that my grandfather, sorry, I'm gonna say this right. My grandmother's grandfather, so I don't know how many great
Hmm.
times that is. He was a fisherman, and he would fish in this river, and he made a pact with the river, and he said that he would give back, he would basically split his bounty with the river as long as he could have a good catch. And so, and that was our family legend and of this man. And so he was like the one who could always, you always had a catch no matter what happened. Yeah, well, what was going
Hmm.
on? And so, or maybe he was just a good fisherman. You know, we're very superstitious people. So I've always been fascinated by that story, and so I turned the river spirit into a literal river spirit, and that's where that comes from.
That's wonderful. I think it's a little bit of both. I think you're a good fisherman because you made the pact.
Hmm.
Definitely. Okay, so the next question is from Mary Casagrande. As a writer, how was the writing process for this adult novel different from the YA novels you've written in the past, besides the sexy times?
I actually want you to answer the reverse of this question because you wrote a YA short story for me.
Oh, I did. I've written a couple of
Yeah,
YA short stories. Yeah.
yeah. So for me, the process doesn't change. I go in trying to make an outline. I think about I always I start with a character that I can't stop thinking about, and then I try to figure out what their story is. Then I
Mhm.
make an outline, I deviate from the outline, and then at some point I have a first draft after a lot of coffee. But the thing that the only thing I don't really think of something as like, okay, this is going to be YA or this is going to be adult. I think of it as I need to tell this person's story, and I'm usually writing to the person I was at the age of my main character. I guess I've only
Mhm.
written I haven't written an older character. So then at that point I would have to just guess. Uh, um, but before that, I'm just trying to answer. I'm just trying to tell the story. So when I write middle grade, I'm like, well, what does 11-year-old Zoraida want to read? Right. And so that's how I approach it. And so you started off as an adult writer, and
Right.
then you started writing some YA short stories, including the short story in my anthology, Vampires Never Get Old.
That's right. Yes, and I wrote like cowboy vampires, and like people freak out, like, but they don't know I'm from Texas, and so makes perfect sense, if you live in the Southwest to have some cowboy vampires. But yeah, I think I do the same thing. I'm writing the story of a human, a person, and I think I think about what I would have wanted to read at that age, what would have appealed to me, whether I'm writing my middle grade novel or whether I'm writing that YA character. And of course, when I'm writing adult, what do I like right now? And so, yeah, in a way, it's sort of a selfish process in the sense of I'm writing the things that I want to read. And then hopefully I'm writing good enough characters and a good enough story that it appeals, more universally than just to me. So yeah, it is this pretty much the same process.
I love that.
Cool.
Excellent.
Okay, let's see. Next question from Chris Cho. Do you listen to music while you write? I checked out your Spotify playlist for this amazing book. What is your fave Natalie Lafourcade song?
Natalie Lafourcade, I actually got to see her live in New York a couple of years ago. Like, I think it was the summer before the pandemic. If you get this book, the paperback edition, there are some like book club questions in the back. And I think the book club links to my playlist. But also if you go to Spotify and you type in my username, you got it. Zoraida, those were given out during the promotional times. This is great. Zoraida Solo on Spotify, you can find my playlist. I make a playlist for every book, just because there comes a point where I need noise in order to write. Like I need a loud coffee shop, or I can't write in silence. I can edit in silence. So that's my process. But because I need music, I need loudness. These are like, I can block out the world. So I'm probably shouting. My roommate is probably like, she's shouting again. I'll play a song that has like a theme of that corresponds to the theme of a character or something, or just a vibe. And I'll just play it on a loop. And because I play it on a loop, it becomes background noise. So I don't even pay attention to the lyrics. Like there's a character in my Star Wars novel, and I can only write one chapter for him when the song is Can't Stop Me Now by so like I just play that song on a loop and I'm like, okay, this is this character's chapter. And it's just like everyone needs a hype song, right?
Yep.
My favorite Natalie Lafourcade song is actually the song called Hasta la Raíz, which is the title of part 4 in Orquídea Divina, which means down to the root. And it's a beautiful song.
That's awesome. I have to say, I also create playlists for all my novels, and they're very Pavlovian for me. I put the headphones on, I turn the playlist on, and I can write anywhere, airport, office, whatever. And I do the same thing. I create, songs with the mood or about my characters, and then you have them on repeat. And by the time it gets in your brain, it's just, it's background noise, but it's like the perfect mood for whatever it is that I'm writing. Cool.
Nice.
I did not know that. We have that in common. Okay. Another question from Ethel. Are any of your characters based on any family members? You talked a little bit about that. Or people you knew from Ecuador? Please tell us a story of a strong woman you grew respect for from your homeland.
I mean, probably my mom, my grandmother, everyone like that. I think, the women in my family are really interesting because I'll have somebody like my great grandmother never left the city that we were from. She never left Guayaquil. She never even went to visit like the highlands of Ecuador or tourism, right? Just the idea of going somewhere else is not a lot. And then you have my grandmother who immigrated in the 80s to New York. At that point, it was easier to get a visa, to come here. And her sister had already moved to the United States in the 70s. So when my grandmother came, she has a physical disability. She has a broken hip that never healed, right? She had like a bunch of botched surgeries in Ecuador, and since she was 18. And so she came to New York and just worked until she could retire and just led her life and learned a little bit of English and then brought over my mom, and then my mom eventually brought me over. And so it because you can do like family sponsor visas, and things like that. And so I guess like my grandmother's journey of just going from a single mother, eventually a single mother of 6 children, to, you know, working her way up in New York, so that we could have whatever we have, and so that I could just be a writer and travel is really fascinating to me. Like that's, I don't know if that's a full story, but you know, that's my grandmother's story.
Yeah, amazing. So Madison Robinson asked, what has been the most fun part of your writing process?
You know, right now it's been really hard because I don't know about you, but like writing during the pandemic has been really difficult. I feel very burned out. And so the thing that gives me the best boost is watching TV, reading other people's books,
Yes.
and just sort of escaping into that kind of fiction media. And so my favorite part of my writing process is the part where I get to read and refill my well of reading and do research. So I don't know about it. You should answer this too.
Oh yeah, 100%. I agree. And that in the playlist. I love putting together the playlist like before I start writing. That's like the best part.
Have you ever watched the episode The Book Job from The Simpsons?
No.
Okay. This is on Disney Plus. I think it's season 23.
Okay.
But in The Simpsons is basically styled, I think, after Ocean's 11. I spelled Simpsons wrong in the chat, but there's a scene where Bart and Homer are group writing a book with Neil Gaiman, and to be a commercial success, and Lisa is trying to write a book organically, like I'm gonna write a book and it's gonna be amazing, and the entire time while the group writing book writes a full novel, she's literally procrastinating. She's organizing her CDs. She's going to the coffee shop and buying coffee. You know, she's like playing video games online. And I feel like that's part of it.
Absolutely. Okay, we just have a few more minutes. I'm going to try to get some of these questions in.
Sure. Yeah.
So Taylor Jefferson says, hi, Zoraida. For me, one of the best parts of the novel is the relationship between Marimar and Ray, especially the responses to Orquídea and her life and choices throughout the story, as well as their gifts as they grieve her in their own distinct ways. Why was it important to you to have Ray receive his gift in such a place that it boosted his artistic career and endeavors, whereas Marimar, who also bore her own share of resentment, received her gift, which was ostensibly closed off to her as Orquídea was, despite her every effort to connect and to understand?
Well, yeah. So the three grandchildren of Orquídea, or 2 grandchildren, 1 great grandchild. So her descendants, they inherit some of her power. You know, it is called the inheritance of Orquídea Divina. And so that inheritance is a kind of magic. The magic manifests in sort of like a body horror type of way, where a flower literally protrudes from their body. And so the magic appears to each one in a different way. So Ray's comes out of his wrist because he's an artist and he wants to work with his hands. And he never really felt it wasn't until he got this magic that he could create. And the creation of art has a price. For me, it is my shoulders. I have a pinched back. That is the price. For Marimar, who's the main character, her flower comes out of her throat, but it never opens. It stays as a bud for years. And the reason that happens is because she has sort of inherited her family's silence. And Orquídea keeps a lot of secrets, and that translates into silence. And I know so many people who, no matter where they're from, have these like grandparents who have these like secrets. Maybe they left behind something, not even in another country, but in a different town, right? Like people pick up and start a new life somewhere, whether it's like going from Florida to Montana or going from Ecuador to New York, right? And we never know why. Like sometimes we just don't know why, and sometimes people want to leave their past behind, but that can translate into generational silence. And so that's sort of where it was important to have their the manifestations of their magic that way.
Yeah, and she
Mhm.
has to find her voice, right? I mean, that's
Yeah, she
part
has
of
to find her
the
voice.
challenge, right?
Yeah.
And yeah. Anyway, I was like, and they're screaming. Like there's a number of times in the book where like someone screams, like they have these primal screams, and I just thought, oh, that's someone trying to find their voice. But okay. So let's see. An anonymous attendee asks, what is a genre that you find difficult and possible to write?
I haven't gotten there yet.
Mm.
Right, because I write fantasy. I write I guess Star Wars. You write Star Wars. Like it's
Mhm.
technically science fiction. It's
Mhm.
science fantasy, space opera. You know,
Yeah.
the science. I don't have to know how to fly a spaceship.
Yeah.
I think mysteries are hard for me. Like thriller mysteries are hard for
Mm.
me because I naturally want to have more jokes into my book. So I guess I could write like a Carl Hyacin type
There
of
you
mystery
go.
where it's a little bit more funny. Um, what about you? Do you have like a genre that you've been dying to write or waiting for to pull the trigger?
Oh gosh. So after I finish this epic fantasy trilogy, I am writing a mafia family story. It's going to be a weather mafia. It's like a science fantasy type thing where people control the weather, mafia families. So I'm down for that. I would love to write a real heist sometimes, but heists
Mm.
are intimidating. I think to get it right, when you get it right, it's awesome. But there are people who kind of do a heist and you're like, I don't know. I don't know if I believe it. But I love that sort of ragtag group comes together, pulls off some heist, and and you're all on their side. But that would be hard to write, I think.
Hmm.
So kudos to the people who can do it well. I aspire.
I also say that I write adult romance under the name Zoe Castile. I'm putting that also in the chat. That's my romance pen name. So it's more adult.
Nice.
Mhm.
Let's see. So we have maybe time for one or two more questions.
Sure.
What advice would you give to aspiring writers that want to write but feel intimidated and anxiety about the process? Oof. Well, welcome to writing.
I have a podcast called Deadline City. Um, podcast Deadline, because I used to joke with my friend Danielle Clayton. You, of course, you know Danielle, that we lived in Deadline City. That was our residence. You know, when you ask me what's my home is Deadline. That's literally my
Yes.
home. When I went long distance hiking, my backpack was named Deadline because I knew that that's what was waiting for me when I got back.
Oh my God.
And so it is my beast of burden. Um, and so I think that my first advice would be to write something that you can't stop thinking about. I feel like everyone has a question that they want answered, right? Like, what is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of love? Where is home, right? How do I find myself? And I feel like if everything else is too intimidating, outlines, there's so much resources out there, right? It's hard to sometimes think, think of one. But if that's too intimidating, just take a character and just write something that happens to them, and then write something that happens to them again, right? And they make a choice, they make another choice, they make another choice, and slowly you get a book, I feel, right?
I think that's right. Well, hopefully you get a draft and then you get to edit it
And then you
and you
get to
get to
fix
like
it.
make it pretty,
Yeah.
but don't worry about it on your first pass. Just get the story out, something that, like you said, obsesses you or interests you and dig. I think that's great.
Oh
Okay, so
no, chat. Hold on. My messages weren't going to the full chat, so I'm going to rewrite some of these.
okay, great. Well, you do
Okay.
that. I am going to, let's see. I think we're about out of time.
Make it a good one.
I know, right? Right. Let me look. I think there's a bunch that are.
I feel like I saw I can't find the question, but somebody asked about software. I wouldn't even worry about software too much. I use Scrivener. What do you use? I use Scrivener to draft and Microsoft Word to edit.
Yep. Same. Scrivener is great because you can move around your chapters. You don't have to overcommit. You know, you can play with the outline a lot. I really outline in Scrivener, and then do a rough draft about 80%, move it to Word, and then sort of put it all together. So
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, so sort of last question. Any interesting or surprising revelations you've had while doing research for any of your writing?
I don't know. I feel like my brain is a sieve after I turn in a book. So, but you know, this is nothing to do with Orquídea Divina, but I did write a series called Incendiary, and it's like a Spanish inspired fantasy from ancient Spain, 1400 Spain. And when I was doing research for that book, I was reading about the basically like border controls of the 1400s in Spain. And I'm like, wow, literally nothing has changed. Humanity just is terrible all the time. So,
there you go.
So that was surprising.
Wonderful. So I always like to end by asking, what authors are you reading right now? Who would you maybe recommend? Who are your favorites? What are you really enjoying?
Well, for my romance lovers, I'm really enjoying historical. If you like historical romance, there's a book called A Caribbean Heiress. I'm going to spell heiress wrong. Heiress in Paris by Adriana Herrera. I also read, I don't know if you've read Book of Night by Holly Black.
Yes,
which is like a mystery, urban fantasy, thriller. Literally anything Rebecca Roanhorse has written, especially your Black Sun series for like that secondary world, Game of Thronesy, feeling fantasy. And what else have I been reading? I've basically been reading.
Chat. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been reading Star Wars books because that's what I do to prepare, right? So I just have like it's all Star Wars here all the time until Monday, and then I'm gonna unplug for a month. Nice. What about you? What writers are you?
Oh gosh, what am I reading right now? Well, I really love this year. I love Master of Jen by P. Djeli Clark. I love She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. And then just recently I read Babel by R.F. Kuang, which was wonderful. Really, really good.
You are the second person who's told me about that book in 2 days.
It's good.
I'm desperate for an arc.
Yes. We'll chat after.
Yeah. And my question for you, since we have 2 minutes left, is what do you have releasing next?
Oh, okay. So next I have Tread of Angels, which is a short novel. They've told me to call it a short novel. It is a novella, about 200 pages, which is sort of a Western noir. There's a murder mystery at the heart of it. There are fallen angels and demon lords in a 1880s inspired mining town in Colorado, where instead of mining silver and gold, they're mining the bones of a dead angel for their technology.
Oh my God.
And so, yeah, it's about siblings and exes and wanting things too much.
I can't wait. And the reason I can't wait is somebody asked if I'm going to write another adult book. I do write multiple adult books, but so I have an adult romance coming up, which is a Disney princess sort of adult romance. But my next book, which either comes out in some time, but it's also about angels, and it's about a fallen angel who is cursed. Basically his punishment for for rebelling against heaven. I'm doing the Milton
Me
Paradise
too.
Lost angels. Yeah. So the best angels. And so his punishment is he has to basically search for his wings for eternity on Earth
Ooh.
every 100 years. And so this time he has 7 days, and he meets this woman who is accused of being involved in her ex-boyfriend's murder or disappearance. They don't know what's going on. And so she has to clear her name. He has to get his wings, and it's 7 days. So it's like a race
Ooh,
to the
nice.
finish line. That's what I'm gonna be working on this whole, that's what I've been working on this whole year. So I'm gonna work on it some more in the fall. And I'm very excited. It's called Fall of the Rebel Angels. And so that's my next one.
Oh, excellent. We will have our 2 angel books together. It will be awesome.
I know. Oh my God. We have to do another one of these. It's gonna be
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. We will talk Milton. So thank you to everyone who joined us. Please remember that the Inheritance of Orquídea Divina and all of Zoraida's books and mine are available 24/7 on bn.com and at your local Barnes & Noble stores. I believe there are links in the chat to make it easy for you. Thanks again to everyone who attended, and a big thank you to you, Zoraida, for writing this brilliant novel and for coming to talk with us this evening.
Thank you so much for doing this. If I didn't get to answer your question, you can hit me up on Instagram and I'll try. I'm on deadline, so maybe I'll get to it next week. But yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Awesome. Good night, everyone.
Bye, everybody.